I want you to imagine stepping off the edge of the known world, right into a sweltering, storm-battered void.
Oh, that is a terrifying visual right from the start.
Right. You're floating on a 40-foot fiberglass shell, just dead in the middle of the Philippine Sea. It is late February 2016.
And the specific date in the official logs kind of wavers, right? Between Thursday the 25th and Friday the 26th.
Yeah, exactly. But the environmental conditions are totally undisputed. It is
Yeah.
a deceptively perfect glassy day out there. Clear skies, the ocean stretches out in this 360-degree flat line of just impossible blue.
Just absolute vastness.
Yeah. So you pull your small fishing skiff alongside a drifting white yacht. You expect to find a desperate survivor, maybe someone starved or injured, just calling out for help.
Which is what anyone would expect.
Exactly. So you pry open the companionway doors, you step down into the baking, claustrophobic darkness of the cabin, and instead you find a man perfectly frozen in time.
Wow, just frozen.
He is seated at his navigation desk, completely transformed into a statue. He's been mummified by the sea itself. So today, our mission for this deep dive is to investigate one of the most terrifying maritime mysteries of the modern era.
And it really is one of the most chilling cases we've ever looked at.
It really is. We're pulling from international police reports, forensic analyses, and some really extensive dispatches from The Guardian and all of that. That's interesting, just to try and reconstruct the final, utterly solitary voyage of the yacht Sayo.
It's a narrative that just strips away every single illusion we have about our mastery over nature.
Oh, absolutely.
When we study history's great shipwrecks, we usually focus on the spectacle, right? Like
Right.
the iceberg or the torpedo or the massive hurricane.
Right, the big cinematic disasters.
Exactly. But the Sayo forces us to confront a much quieter and I think far more insidious horror. It is the horror of boundless, just absolute isolation.
Because the open ocean, it just does not respect the boundaries or the perimeters we rely on for psychological comfort on land.
No, not at all. Out there, the environment is just an entirely indifferent force. It's a canvas of complete vulnerability where a tragedy can play out in agonizing slow motion.
And completely unwitnessed by the rest of humanity, which is just...
Unimaginable.
Yeah. And that isolation is exactly what 23-year-old Christopher Rivas and his fellow fishermen encountered. They were operating out of Borobo, which is a municipality on the eastern seaboard of the Philippine island of Mindanao.
And they're pretty far out, right?
Yeah, they're between 40 and 60 miles offshore. And to put that into perspective for you, at 60 miles out, the curvature of the Earth has long since swallowed the coastline.
You are totally alone.
You are completely outside the range of terrestrial cell towers. You are in a literal maritime dead zone. And as they scan that empty horizon, they spot something that immediately triggers a primal sense of dread.
Because it just doesn't belong there.
Right. It's a 40-foot white sailing yacht. But its silhouette is fundamentally wrong. I mean, long before they can read the name painted on the stern, Rivas can see the vessel who's been mutilated.
And, the visual cues of a dying ship, they're unmistakable to anyone who actually makes their living on the water.
Right, they would know instantly.
Yeah, they would. The most glaring abnormality Rivas would have seen was the mast. Because on a 40-foot sailing yacht, the mast is this massive, towering extrusion of aluminum or carbon fiber.
That's the spine of the boat, right?
Exactly. It is the vessel's spine, its sole means of harnessing the wind for propulsion. And on this yacht, that massive central pillar was just violently snapped in half.
Oh, man.
Just collapsing this huge tangle of heavy steel rigging and canvas directly onto the deck.
And, I mean, a snapped mast doesn't just mean you can't sail. It means the boat has been subjected to unimaginable violent kinetic energy.
Yeah, something catastrophic happened.
Right. And the trauma to the ship didn't stop there. The white fiberglass hull was riding ominously low in the water. It was heavily burdened, which indicates it had taken on significant amounts of the ocean.
It's sinking, basically.
Slowly, yeah.
Yeah.
It was bobbing sluggishly, just completely at the mercy of the current. And I think the most chilling part is it was completely silent.
No distress signals at all.
None. No flares arching into the sky, no frantic waving from the deck, just a broken, flooded shell adrift in the sun.
In maritime terminology, that vessel is what we call dead in the water. It has lost all maneuverability and all command.
It's just a piece of debris at that point.
Right. When a boat loses its helm, it no longer cuts through the waves. It turns parallel to them. It gets caught in the trough, rolling sickeningly from side to side.
Ugh, that sounds awful.
It is. Rivas and his companion were basically looking at a ghost ship. But maritime law specifically the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. It mandates a strict duty to render assistance to any person found at sea in danger of being lost.
So they couldn't just turn around and leave,
No, they couldn't simply sail away. They had a legal and moral obligation to investigate.
which honestly requires an incredible amount of psychological fortitude. I mean, boarding an unstable, partially submerged yacht in the open ocean is a lethal gamble.
Oh, absolutely. It's incredibly dangerous.
You have to pull your skiff alongside a vessel that is wallowing unpredictably, and the acoustics alone would be terrifying.
Just the sounds of it breaking apart.
Yeah. The ocean is vast and quiet, which just amplifies this heavy, sickening slosh of thousands of gallons of trapped seawater surging back and forth inside the yacht's hull.
And you'd hear the fiberglass too, right?
Yes, you hear this eerie, high-pitched groaning of stressed fiberglass grinding against the snapped steel rigging.
And you also have the physical danger of the boarding itself. The Sayo's deck would be incredibly treacherous. It'd be slick with salt and algae, cluttered with the unpredictable tension of those snapped steel cables.
Like a booby trap.
Basically, yeah. One rogue wave causing the yacht to roll could easily crush their smaller skiff or just drag the fishermen under entirely. They had to time their jump perfectly, stepping off their stable platform onto a decaying wreck.
So they managed to get onto the deck. They're calling out like, "Hello, is anyone aboard?"
It's getting nothing back.
Complete silence. No response. They navigate through the wreckage of the collapsed mast and they find the companionway. That's the narrow set of stairs leading down into the interior cabin.
Right.
And I really want you to mentally place yourself in that descent. As Rivas steps down into the bowels of the ship, the physical environment shifts violently. He leaves the fresh ocean breeze and descends into this sealed, sweltering microclimate.
And that atmospheric shift would be a physical assault on the senses. A sealed fiberglass cabin baking under the tropical Pacific sun. I mean, it acts essentially as a solar kiln.
Just trapping all that heat.
Exactly. The temperature down there could easily exceed 120 degrees Fahrenheit. The air is entirely stagnant, heavy with this suffocating mixture of evaporated salt, damp upholstery, spilled diesel fuel, and the distinct, unmistakable odor of rot.
God, that's horrifying.
Right.
And the scene inside is just pure chaos. It looks like the interior of the cabin had been put inside a washing machine.
Just everything tossed everywhere.
Yeah, personal belongings, clothing, loose paperwork, tins of food, they're all just violently scattered across every inch of the floorboards. It paints a picture of a vessel that has been pitched and rolled mercilessly by severe weather.
But the fishermen keep going.
They do. They carefully navigate through this debris field, moving toward the navigation station. That's the nerve center of the yacht where the marine radio and the charts are kept.
And that navigation station is where the narrative sharply pivots. It goes from being a tragic shipwreck into just a macabre forensic nightmare.
Completely. Because seated right at the navigation desk is a man, and he is completely naked.
Which is immediately so unsettling.
Right. He is slumped heavily forward, his head resting permanently on his right arm, which is positioned inches from the radio telephone. When Inspector Mark Navales, the Barobo Police Department, eventually processes the scene, he uses a phrase that really haunts me.
What did he say?
He said the man looked, quote, like he was sleeping.
Oh, wow. That is a deeply unsettling observation. Because the reality of the body completely defied the environment it was found in.
Yes. Because he wasn't just deceased, he was entirely mummified. His skin had turned to this rigid, leathery gray. His form was perfectly preserved, right down to the shape of his muscles and the hair on his head.
He basically became a statue.
He had become a human statue. Imagine the psychological shock of that moment for Rivas. You pry open a modern floating fiberglass yacht, expecting a contemporary rescue scenario, and you step into an environment that mirrors an ancient Egyptian crypt.
And the immediate visual analysis of the scene, it presents this labyrinth of contradictions. When the local authorities eventually arrive and secure the Sayo, they have to treat this floating tomb as a potential homicide.
Because you just don't know out there.
Right, standard procedure. However, a preliminary sweep of the cabin and the corpse yields incredibly confusing data points.
Yeah, for one, the body shows absolutely zero signs of blunt force trauma, no defensive wounds, or any indication of foul play.
None at all.
And furthermore, the cabin has clearly been tossed by storms, but it hasn't been ransacked by human hands. We know piracy is a very real threat in certain global waters, but the high-value items on the Sayo, they were all still there.
Like the electronics?
Exactly. The expensive marine GPS unit, the two-way radio system, various other electronics, they're all sitting entirely untouched.
Now, the only item of personal value seemingly missing from the immediate vicinity is his wallet. And, in a vacuum, a missing wallet screams robbery.
Right, that's the first thing you think.
Yeah, but when we apply the physics of a derelict ship to the scene, a much more mundane and terrifying reality emerges. This boat has been violently rolled by massive swells for an unknown period. The cabin was repeatedly flooded.
So it just washed away.
Exactly. A small, lightweight object like a leather wallet wouldn't be stolen. It would simply be swept off a table and washed down into the deep, inaccessible bilge water that's sloshing below the floorboards.
That makes total sense. And honestly, the posture of the body is the clue that truly anchors the tragedy. He is slumped directly next to the radio telephone.
Which tells us a lot about his final moments.
It does. He wasn't strapped into his bunk trying to ride out a storm. He wasn't desperately bailing water with a bucket. He was stationed at the communications array. This instantly tells us that whatever killed him struck with overwhelming immediate force.
Like he had no warning.
Exactly. Was he reaching for the mic to broadcast a frantic mayday call? Was he checking his exact GPS coordinates to see how many hundreds of miles he was from the nearest shipping lane?
The posture strongly indicates a sudden, catastrophic biological failure. He experienced an event so severe that it instantly severed his consciousness before he could even alter his position or brace himself.
So the authorities sift through the scattered paperwork in the sweltering cabin, and they quickly put a name to the mummy. He is a 59-year-old German national named Manfred Fritz Bajorat.
And then they move him, right?
Yeah, they managed to carefully extract his rigid remains from the Sayo, transporting him to a regional crime laboratory on the Philippine mainland for a full autopsy. And the medical examiners confirm exactly what that slumped posture suggested.
Yeah, Chief Superintendent Wilben Mayer, who was acting as the national police spokesman, released the official cause of death to the public. Manfred Fritz Bajorat suffered an acute myocardial infarction.
A massive heart attack.
A massive, catastrophic heart attack. Dr. Mark Beneck, a highly respected forensic criminologist based in Cologne, Germany, he reviewed the crime scene photographs and the autopsy data.
And what does he find?
Well, he pointed out that the specific way Manfred was seated is the absolute hallmark of an unexpected cardiac event. The pain hits, the blood pressure drops to zero in an instant, and the body simply collapses in upon itself.
So fast that there's no time to react.
Exactly. There is no crawling, no struggle. The lights just extinguish.
But while the biological cause of death was definitively solved, the timeline of his death birthed a forensic controversy that genuinely strains the imagination.
Oh, this is where it gets really weird.
Yeah. The local Philippine Regional Police, the first authorities to process the physical scene, they issued an official statement estimating that the German sailor had been dead for, quote, more or less 7 days.
And I have to aggressively push back on that police estimate.
Please do.
Because it directly contradicts the fundamental laws of biology. If you leave a biological organism in a 120-degree, incredibly humid environment like a flooded fiberglass cabin in the tropics, it does not mummify in a week.
No, it decays.
Exactly. It putrefies rapidly. 7 days simply does not produce a perfect, leathery statue.
You are entirely correct to challenge that. Forensic science flatly rejects the 7-day timeline. Dr. Peter Veneses, who is a renowned professor of forensic pathology at Barts and the London School of Medicine and Dentistry, he publicly corrected the record.
What did he say about the timeline?
He detailed that human mummification is not a rapid process. To achieve the level of complete, rigid preservation seen in Manfred Bajorat naturally, without chemical embalming, requires a minimum of 2 to 3 weeks just to arrest the decomposition process.
And probably much longer to reach the state he was in.
Yeah, likely several months to cure the tissue into the state it was found.
So we have to examine the actual mechanics of the Philippine Sea. How does the ocean, which is teeming with bacteria and moisture, turn a man into a mummy instead of accelerating his decay?
Right. Seems counterintuitive.
It requires a morbidly perfect storm of environmental factors. Normally, human decomposition is driven by our own internal gut bacteria and external environmental microbes, all of which thrive in heat and ambient moisture.
But the cabin was different.
Right. The specific microclimate of the Sayo's cabin interrupted that biological certainty. First, you have the intense heat acting as an oven, baking the trapped air. Second, you have the continuous dry ocean trade winds that constantly whip across the open Pacific, drawing moisture out of the immediate atmosphere.
So it's essentially the exact mechanical process of a food dehydrator.
Exactly.
You apply steady, dry heat to pull the water out of the tissue before the bacteria can break it down.
Precisely. But the critical overriding catalyst here is the salt. The marine environment is absolutely saturated with halophilic or salt-loving properties. The heavy, briny sea air permeates every microscopic crevice of a boat.
And salt is nature's ultimate desiccant.
Yes. Since antiquity, humanity has used heavy salt to cure meat because it aggressively draws water out of cellular structures by osmosis. It creates a profoundly hostile hypertonic environment where putrefying bacteria simply cannot survive.
So the moment his heart stopped, the environment immediately went to work on it. Dr. Venezzi's noted that the extremities, like the fingers, the nose, the ears, they begin to desiccate rapidly.
Right, the thinnest parts first.
Yeah. Within a few weeks, the skin shrinks violently, turning tough and leathery, tightening around the skeletal structure. Even the internal organs dehydrate and shrivel rather than liquefy.
The tragic irony here is that the local police guessed 7 days precisely because the ocean did such a flawless job of preserving his humanity.
That is so eerie.
He didn't look like a rotting corpse. He looked perfectly, eerily intact. But the forensic reality demands that he sat at that desk entirely alone for weeks, or perhaps months.
I really want you, the listener, to visualize the sheer, unadulterated horror of this timeline. A 59-year-old man is sitting at his radio, his heart gives out, and he dies instantly, slumping onto the desk. But his physical presence doesn't fade.
He just stays there.
For weeks, his body sits perfectly motionless in that chair. Meanwhile, the ocean around him goes absolutely mad. The Sayo is caught in a massive Pacific storm system. The boat is thrown down the face of 30-foot swells.
Just a horrific storm.
The wind screams at hurricane speeds. The kinetic force reaches a breaking point, and the massive aluminum mast violently snaps with a concussive boom, crashing onto the deck. The cabin rolls violently, taking on freezing seawater, throwing cans of food, heavy books, and personal belongings into the walls.
Utter destruction.
And through all of that unimaginable violence, noise, and destruction, the mummified captain remains seated at his desk undisturbed, while the salt air methodically cures his skin.
It creates an indelible image of profound stillness existing within the epicenter of absolute chaos. The vessel was being systematically ripped apart by the elements, but those same elements were simultaneously freezing its captain in time.
They cemented his final moment into a permanent physical record.
Which, demands that we ask, who was the man trapped in that cabin? Who was Manfred Fritz Bajorat?
Right, because when we step away from the grisly forensics and look at the scattered debris of his life, a deeply tragic psychological profile emerges. This was not a weekend hobbyist who bought a yacht on a midlife whim and strayed too far from the marina.
Not at all. Manfred Bajorat possessed a staggering maritime resume. By the time he was found on the Sayo, he had logged over 500,000 nautical miles at sea.
We really have to pause and quantify that number because it is almost incomprehensible. 500,000 nautical miles.
It's massive.
The circumference of the Earth at the equator is roughly 21,600 nautical miles. This man had sailed the equivalent distance of circumnavigating the globe more than 23 times.
And to achieve that kind of mileage requires an obsessive dedication to the craft. It requires enduring the relentless physical punishment of sailing.
The sleep deprivation, the physical labor.
Exactly. The constant manual labor of trimming sails and the psychological toll of endless horizons. He lived, breathed, and ultimately belonged to the ocean.
And the interior of the Sayo reflected a life entirely contained within its fiberglass walls. Amidst the storm damage, the seawater, and the mummified remains, the Barobo police investigators found what I can only describe as the ghosts of his past.
What did they find down there?
They uncovered a trove of meticulously kept family photo albums.
Wow. The emotional whiplash for the investigators must have been severe. You are processing this grim, isolated death scene, and scattered beneath your boots are physical manifestations of deep, vibrant human connection.
Yes, the photographs documented a man who once had a very rich terrestrial life. There were pictures of Manfred and his family sitting at sunlit cafes in Paris, posing happily in front of Notre Dame Cathedral, enjoying picnics in green parks.
A completely different life.
It painted a picture of a tight-knit, loving family unit. But there was one specific photograph found in the wreckage that carries a devastating emotional weight.
It was a heavily handled photograph, right, of Manfred holding an infant. And on the back, written as a loving caption, were the words, "Our first time with our little button on the sea."
Little Button. It's such a tender, intensely private nickname. It forces us to reconcile two opposing images. The loving father proudly introducing his baby to the ocean, and the desiccated mummy dying entirely alone in the Pacific.
how do you get from one to the other?
Exactly. How does a man with such profound connections end up choosing an existence of absolute, inescapable solitude?
Well, to understand his trajectory, we have to look at the timeline of his losses. The authorities, working with the German embassy to locate his next of kin, began piecing together his history.
And he didn't always sail alone, did he?
No, Manfred didn't always sail alone. For decades, he sailed alongside his wife, Claudia. They were a formidable team, navigating the world's oceans together. She was his partner in every sense of the word.
But the ocean, for all its vastness, couldn't provide an escape from human frailty. In 2008, after years of navigating the globe together, Manfred and Claudia's marriage dissolved. They divorced, shattering the partnership that had defined his life.
And the tragedy compounded rapidly after that.
It did.
Just 2 years later, in 2010, Claudia died of cancer.
And that infant in the photograph, little Button. Her real name is Nina. By the time the Sayo was found drifting in 2016, Nina had grown up. The ocean was clearly in her blood, too.
She became a sailor as well.
Yeah. She'd followed in her father's wake and become the captain of a massive commercial freight vessel. In a heartbreaking twist of fate, the authorities actually had to contact Nina and fly her out to the Philippines to formally identify her father's mummified remains.
That is just gut-wrenching. Let's dissect Manfred's psychological state following the year 2010. He is a man who has watched his marriage collapse. He has watched his ex-wife succumb to a brutal, wasting disease.
And his daughter doesn't need him in the same way anymore.
Right. His daughter is grown, independent, and commanding her own ships. Reports indicate he harbored an intense dislike for the freezing, restrictive winters of his native Germany.
So he has no tether left to the land.
None. So what is his response to this overwhelming grief? He exiles himself. He makes the ocean his permanent, solitary home.
We have to recognize that his ultimate isolation was a highly conscious choice. For a mariner with 500,000 miles of experience, the open ocean might have been the only environment that offered psychological clarity.
It makes sense in a dark way.
It's a sensory deprivation tank on a planetary scale. Out there, your problems are immediate, physical, and solvable. You monitor the barometric pressure, you navigate the swells, you secure the rigging.
It keeps you focused on surviving the next hour.
Exactly. It is a harsh but simple existence that allows you to compartmentalize the complex, unsolvable emotional agony of losing your family.
He traded the ghosts of his past for the ghosts of the sea, which leads us into the maddening, almost unmappable timeline of his final years and the terrifying mystery of exactly when the Sayo's mast was broken.
Charting his final voyage is an exercise in tracing shadows.
It really is. We know his truly solitary seafaring began in earnest around 2008, aligning perfectly with his divorce. He actually took a brief hiatus from the Sayo to log a massive maritime milestone, traveling aboard a heavy-duty commercial freighter called the Hyundai Renaissance, crossing the equator on a long-haul route from Singapore down to Durban, South Africa.
But he eventually returns to his own yacht. And the investigative sources bring forward a crucial piece of eyewitness testimony from a fellow sailor named Dieter, who crossed paths with Manfred in Majorca off the coast of Spain.
And Dieter's insight is fascinating here.
It is. Dieter provides us with a vital professional assessment of Manfred's capabilities, and he makes a very specific, chilling assertion to the press.
Yeah, Dieter was completely adamant about Manfred's skill level. He told reporters, "I don't believe he would have sailed into a storm. I believe the mast broke after Manfred was already dead."
We need to pull that statement apart because the implications are pure horror. If Manfred, a man who possessed the skill to navigate 500,000 miles of water, did not make a catastrophic navigational error and sail his vessel into a lethal storm,
then that means he died in perfectly calm, benign waters?
Exactly. It completely alters the narrative of his final moments. He wasn't fighting for his life against 80-mile-an-hour winds. He was likely enjoying a beautiful, mild day. The ocean was calm. The sun was shining.
He just sat down at his navigation desk, perhaps to log his coordinates, and his heart simply gave out in the silence.
And that is when the true nightmare scenario begins for the Sayo. You have a 40-foot yacht that has just lost its brain. It is completely unguided. It drifts blindly into the vast expanse of the Pacific.
At the mercy of whatever weather rolls in.
Yeah. And eventually, days, weeks, or months later, this ghost ship sails directly into violent weather. I want to emphasize the visceral physics of a massive ocean storm hitting an unmanned yacht.
Oh, the physics are absolutely brutal. A sailboat survives a storm by having a captain actively steer the bow into the oncoming waves, right? Slicing through that kinetic energy.
You have to face the waves.
Exactly. Without a helmsman, the Sayo would naturally pivot and get caught broadside in the trough of the waves.
Imagine 30 or 40-foot swells slamming directly into the flat side of the fiberglass hull. The boat is shoved violently sideways, tilting at severe angles. The mast, which is essentially a giant lever arm extending 40 feet into the air, acts as a pendulum.
Just swinging wildly.
Yes. The hurricane-force winds catch the unreefed canvas sails, putting thousands of pounds of sheer, tearing pressure on the aluminum structure. The rigging groans. The steel cables stretch to their absolute limit, and then, with a concussive crack louder than a gunshot, the mast simply shatters.
It just gives way entirely.
It collapses, dragging the boat even lower into the water. The sea pours over the decks, flooding down the companionway stairs, turning the cabin into a swirling vortex of debris. And through this apocalyptic violence, the mummified corpse of the captain sits rigidly at the desk, completely indifferent to the destruction of his world.
It is the ultimate manifestation of nature's indifference. The storm exerts its force regardless of whether the captain is breathing or preserved in salt. It just destroys what is in its path.
So we are left with the ghost story of his timeline. When did the calm waters end and the storm begin? When was Manfred Fritz Bajorat last seen alive?
And the documentary record is fraught with contradictions here.
It really is.
The official maritime clearance documents recovered from the Sayo's cabin showed it had been formally cleared in 2013. The exact port of origin is disputed in the international reporting. It was either São Vicente in Brazil or the island of São Vicente in Cape Verde off the western coast of Africa.
Both are a long way from the Philippines.
Right. But either way, it places him actively, officially sailing the Atlantic Ocean in 2013.
Yet, several investigative reports claim that no human being had physically laid eyes on Manfred since 2009.
But here is where the timeline becomes deeply unsettling. A friend came forward claiming to have communicated with Manfred on Facebook in 2015.
Wait, 2015?
Yes, 2015. Manfred was reportedly posting digital updates and replying to birthday messages from his network.
That detail is profoundly haunting. Think about the modern paradox of that. The sheer, terrifying scale of the ocean allowed a man to maintain a digital social presence, typing a thank you for a birthday wish on a satellite internet connection, while remaining physically unreachable by the rest of humanity.
It's like he was a ghost online before he was a ghost in reality.
Exactly. He was a digital ghost haunting a server somewhere, long before he became a physical mummy haunting the Philippine Sea. You could send him a message, but if he suffered a heart attack the very next second, you couldn't find him to save his life.
It brilliantly highlights the illusion of modern connectivity. We believe that because we have GPS and satellite links, we have conquered isolation.
We think we're always safe.
Right. But out there, the physical reality of the ocean completely supersedes our digital tethers.
This brings us to the climax of the investigation, and frankly, the most heartbreaking artifact pulled from the wreckage. Amidst the water-damaged clothing, the moldering books, and the mummified remains, the Philippine authorities found a single personal note left behind by Manfred.
And that note functions not just as a final communication, but as a window into the suffocating emotional pressure he was enduring.
I am going to read the text of this letter verbatim. I want you to listen to these words and imagine them being written in the swaying, isolated cabin of the yacht, thousands of miles from the nearest human being. 30 years we've been together on the same path. Then the power of the demons was stronger than the will to live. You're gone. May your soul find its peace. You're Manfred.
The power of the demons. When you find a phrase like that on a derelict ghost ship, it completely reframes the narrative.
We really need to analyze this from every angle. We know definitively that the note was addressed to his deceased wife, Claudia. They had shared the ocean for 3 decades. But what exactly were the demons he was referring to?
Was he speaking literally about the aggressive cancer that ravaged her body?
Right, was the disease the demon that overcame her will to live?
Or does the phrase point to a more complex psychological failing? We know their marriage dissolved in 2008, 2 years prior to her death. Were the demons the marital strife, the unspoken grievances, the profound psychological friction of 2 people living in a confined space for 30 years?
I have to inject a truly terrifying philosophical question here, because the timeline of this note is the blank space that keeps me awake at night. When did he write it?
It is the great unanswerable variable of the case.
Let's follow the logical branches. Did he write this letter in 2010, sitting in a harbor somewhere, immediately after receiving the news of her death, and simply keep it on his navigation desk as a shrine for 6 years?
Or
Or did he write it at the very end? Was he sitting in the sweltering, suffocating isolation of the Sayo's cabin, feeling the physical warning signs of a failing heart?
knowing the end was coming?
Right. Was he surrounded by an endless expanse of dark water, realizing he was about to die, and choosing to spend his final moments writing a letter to a ghost before becoming one himself? Yeah. Did his own psychological demons finally catch up to him in the silence?
The lack of closure is precisely what makes this story resonate as a genuine horror documentary. It systematically dismantles our arrogant belief that we are in control.
We really aren't.
Manfred Bajorat was a master mariner. He conquered 500,000 miles of the most treacherous, unforgiving environments on the planet. He understood weather systems, celestial navigation, and survival mechanics better than almost anyone alive. And yet, he was ultimately undone by a microscopic, unpredictable flaw in his own cardiovascular system and by the inescapable emotional gravity of his past.
It is the purest distillation of human vulnerability.
When we synthesize the entire tragic arc of the Sayo, it serves as a grim masterclass in the themes of hubris versus nature. We construct these brilliant fiberglass vessels, we map the ocean floor with high-frequency sonar, we beam signals to satellites in orbit, and we convince ourselves that we have tamed the wild.
But the ocean remains what it has always been.
A completely indifferent force. It is simultaneously a merciless killer, a flawless preserver, and a silent tomb. It harbored no malice toward Manfred. It did not actively seek to strike him down. But when he died, it did not care.
It simply battered his ship, cured his flesh with salt, and swallowed his final secrets.
So why does a story like this dig so deeply under our skin? Why are we fundamentally terrified, yet morbidly obsessed with shipwrecks and the mariners who vanish with them?
I believe it's because a ghost ship is a mirror reflecting our own ultimate helplessness. It is the sudden, chilling realization that despite our concrete cities, our smart devices, and our intricate social safety nets, the Earth is still deeply, dangerously wild.
Just waiting just outside our bubbles.
Exactly. Just an hour past the edge of our cell phone service, just beyond the breakwater of our safe harbors, there is an ancient, unfathomable expanse that is entirely capable of erasing us from existence without leaving a single ripple to mark where we went down.
It ruthlessly reorients our perspective. It reminds us that on a planetary scale, we are fragile, temporary, and incredibly small.
I want to leave you with a final, haunting concept to sit with in the silence. The ocean possesses no caution tape. It respects no jurisdictions. Manfred Fritz Bajorat's body was perfectly, artificially immortalized by the exact same environmental elements that were systematically destroying his ship.
The heat, the dry wind, the salt.
Yes, they worked in tandem to dehydrate his physical form, cementing him in place as a tragic monument to his own isolation. Yet the critical truths of his final existence, the exact day his heart failed, the final thoughts that flickered through his mind as the darkness closed in, and the specific hour when the Pacific rose up and shattered his mast, those details are gone forever.
Swallowed by the sea.
The sea preserved his flesh with terrifying precision, but it completely erased his story.
It leaves behind a shell, a monument without an inscription.
Exactly. Which begs the ultimate question. If the Pacific Ocean is capable of acting as such a flawless, indifferent museum, preserving a man at his desk like a grim statue while the decades roll by.
What else is it hiding?
Exactly. What other forgotten tragedies are out there, perfectly preserved in the salt and the dark, just drifting dead in the water, waiting to be found?